We're good. Okay, so good morning. We're so happy to have you here this morning for coffee at 10 for John Perkins. Amazing talk. He's got a great slideshow for you. And also after the talk, he's going to take questions. And then you can see he has some, work here that you can ask him individual questions and he'll tell you even more about how he got started. So, first of all, welcome and thanks so much to our members and our donors for making this Coffee at 10 series possible. It's amazing we do this every week. And we will continue to do it. Take a little break for art, but next week we have Bill Schwab, Detroit photographer, which will be amazing. So we want to thank Roast and Toast also for bringing amazing coffee. So please feel free to get some coffee and some pastries there. And also this beautiful exhibit that we have, Michigan exhibit. I don't know, today we're focusing on John's work, but if you haven't seen it, I hope you'll really come back and see all of the work in the show. There are many sponsors that went into making this visual arts exhibition possible. You can see the sponsors there. Okay, so I'm going to make a really brief introduction for John because he's going to really tell you all about his long career. So John is from Lansing and he summers up here with his wife at Douglas Lake, and he's been doing that since 1990. And he's had a 40-year career as an auto designer, and so you are going to see an amazing slide presentation with the evolution of his career and so many beautiful designs. And anyway, I'm just going to turn it over.
Thank you. Sounds like a long time ago. Can you all hear me all right? Thank you. In the back row, can you hear me? Okay. Well, good morning, and thank you so much for joining myself and my wife here on the first day of summer. I am truly very honored to be a part of this exhibit of Michigan and American Portrait. And I want to thank Megan and Liz and Sheila and Alyssa and all the staff here at Perkins for being so kind to invite me. I want to thank David Krause here, our main man, for setting up the whole Michigan exhibit and video and PBS presentation. So anyway, I want to kind of keep it informal today, but I wanted to share with you my automotive career that I had at General Motors, and also how I got there, how I got to first base, and I'll spend a little time explaining how the studios were set up back in the day, and also some typical processes. Morning, Steve. Typical processes of how we got a car on the road. But first of all, I was Michigan homegrown. So as you heard from Sheila, grew up in Lansing. Oh, I also want to thank my lovely, beautiful wife, Lorraine, for putting up with me for all those long nights and Saturdays of working overtime. Hardly got to see her or the kids, but she came out of it real good. All of that. But I not only grew up and went to school in the Lansing area, I went off to Flint to General Motors Institute, which is now Kettering. And then I spent my career down in Warren, Michigan at the GM Tech Center, which, believe me, was a dream for any young hopeful who wanted to be a car designer all that way. So I'm going to share today excerpts of what was a presentation I gave to the Oldsmobile Club at the Oldsmobile Museum some years back over in Lansing. And if I can get this thing to work here, look at that. This is one of my latest drawings. Oh no. So I knew from a very young age, let's say 6, 7, 8 years old, that I wanted to be a car designer. And my aunt brought us colored pencils and crayons. So that's how it all started. This was like way before dry markers or anything like that. So, and you can see I kind of pioneered the move for big tires and wheels. And I drew, and that the color, that's all crayon, pencil drawings and crayons. So, and they're all Oldsmobiles. My dad worked at Olds, and he was in the chassis department, so he would bring a different company car home very often. This is number 606, the green and beige Olds 98 that Dad drove home one time. And I think I would have been 7, maybe 7.5 years old then. And Chris, this was the Rocket 88. If you notice look at that clear, transparent hood, you could see the Rocket engine. Now, but I didn't invent that. Oldsmobile had that available on a limited number. You could buy a transparent hood so that everybody could see that Rocket 88, 303 cubic inches, 135 horse, 90 miles an hour, maybe 100 right straight out of the dealer showroom in a straight line, not real good on the turns. And even to this day, my dad bought my brother and myself a model Oldsmobile for Christmas of 1948. So the 49 Oldsmobile Futuramic rocket engine cars were just coming out, and Oldsmobile made the first dealer promo by Kruger out of Chicago. So I still have mine, still survived all those years. And you can tell even our wagons had a 5498 or a 55 Super 88, good old wood wagon. Yeah. But I didn't design that one. I would have looked. I know all the guys that did that, but Dad was in the chassis engineer group, and he would go often from Lansing out to Milford to the GM Proving Ground. Maybe some of you know where that is. And if he had a pretty hot car, he'd swing by the house. He'd call Mom on the phone and say, "Get the boys out at the curb because I'm coming by to show." So my brother and I got to sit in the F88. This is Oldsmobile's version of the original Corvette, but it had a V8 engine in it. Didn't have the Chevy 6 in it. So this has always been one of the archival family photos. I was the passenger. My younger brother got behind the wheel. I should have had Mom take the picture over again, but yeah. But one of the steps along the way, that's not me, was I entered the Fisher Body Craftsman's Guild. This is for young people in ages of 12 to, I guess, 19. You would design and build your own futuristic car. They gave you the tires, and they gave you a drawing of the people, the passengers, and you did all the rest. So when I was 15, I built this car out of white pine wood, lacquered it 15 coats, clear coated it another 10 coats, rubbed it out with rotten stone. And I was very fortunate. I won honorable mention in the state of Michigan, which was pretty good because Michigan and California were your two big states. Here's the car. It was black with a red interior, all hand done. Even that windshield was handmade. At 15, I couldn't do that nowadays. So there we go. It was always stylish. Forget the car. Look at that shirt. But then the teen years. Okay, well, oh, I sure do. I have it in a nice display case downstate in Rochester. Yeah, yeah, and it survived pretty well. There's a few little cracks. Those teen years when all the other kids were out, at the beach or whatever, I was drawing cars, and I would line the basement walls with drawings. And now these are only bond paper size sketches, but you can see it was in the blood. And of course, you had to name the car too. Yeah, a Radicat, and the Emerald, yeah, the Prognosticator, and draw on. This is the Olds 98. Anyway, yes, my first car was a Rocket 88 Oldsmobile with portal walls and Fiesta flipper hubcap. I couldn't hear you.
What street did you live on?
We lived at the corner of Britain. We lived on Britain at Sterling.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, my gosh, yes. Yeah,
Sir.
yeah. So that was it. And so I was still in high school, still trying to pay my way to a career. I was very fortunate. I had a mentor that my dad knew from GM who spent some time at styling, and he would come and sit with me and he would get me all the right material. Now, this is one of the drawings that I did, quote, for my portfolio to get hired somewhere, hopefully GM. And this is a French Canson Mighty Antis paper, all done with pencils. I'm not sure if, do we have dry mark by then? I think maybe the tires and the ground shadow were dry mark, but dry markers were just kind of coming on. I mean, you could maybe get black and gray, but not what came later. This was another Pontiac that I drew and part of my portfolio, and a bus that I drew. And I had a wonderful opportunity to go down to GM styling at the GM Tech Center in Warren. In those days, it was called styling because we were all stylists. We weren't designers yet. But somewhere along the line, maybe in the probably late 70s, maybe we changed the name from GM Styling to GM Design Staff, which has added a lot of confusion because a lot of folks in the auto industry are designers. They might design a hood hinge or a muffler bracket, but design, we were the artists. You didn't want to be called stylists because that was kind of a passé term. It was like blue sky, wild cars. But anyway, so I got a chance to take my work down to GM Styling Tech Center and show it to Chuck Jordan. Chuck was the director of design at that time and number 2 in command. And he came down out of his office, and I'll never forget the day. I had those big fancy renderings that I just showed you, probably 6 or 8 of them, something like that. Then I had a stack of just bond paper roughies that I had done just after my homework, you draw cars. So he goes through the big fancy renderings kind of fast, and I'm thinking, he doesn't see anything there, And he just loves the little ideation sketches. They're just little roughies. And he turned and looked at me and said, "How'd you like to come to work for us next Monday?" True story. So I left my girlfriend and I hustled down to Detroit and found a place to stay and showed up the next Monday morning for work. And that's kind of how it started. I was 21. Yeah. And just back up a little bit. My first days were at Oldsmobile in Lansing on the assembly line. So I was able to transition to the tech center. Yeah.
Did you already have your education from GMI? Took that down to Warren?
Yes, I was in the middle of my sophomore year, junior year. I was able to transition from Oldsmobile engineering assembly to the design staff or styling at the time. And I was the very first styling engineering student that they took on. They gambled on me, Yeah. So once I got down to styling, here is a kind of a new world, an all new medium. And as you can see, now dry markers and chalks and all new processes were in place. And we drew on what you call vellum paper. And you had to have a really good line drawing before you rendered it, usually. And you could work both sides of the paper, which was wonderful, because if you didn't get the color or the value quite right, you could flip it over and kind of help it out that way. So these are some of the, you're getting an all new arena there too, that they really upped the game. That's a long way from my yellow bus. And here's a young man learning the trade, I was working on a gas turbine powered car at that time, one of the first assignments, and was able not only to draw it and render it, but work with the best sculptor in the building to do a scale model of it.
Clay? Is that clay?
Yeah, yes, that's all clay. Yep. And I'll get a little bit more into that too later. Believe it or not, in the auto industry today, we still use clay models, scale and full size, but I'll tell you more about that. One of my first studios, you realize now at GMI is cooperative engineering. So you go to school for 6 weeks, then you come back to your job for 6 weeks. So when I was at styling, I worked in different studios through my career. And I learned the trade I was wonderful mentors. And everywhere you go in a different studio, you learn a little bit difference from one of the different designers. Everybody had a different technique, and you kind of borrow from everybody. You know, you learn everything you can. So my first studio assignment happened to be on the '66 Oldsmobile Toronado. I was just delighted to be able to work on that car. There is the original sketch over here on the wall, the original vellum. And this was a front end design that I had drawn as a student, and we actually modeled it on the car. The car was already done by the guys in Olds Studio, and Bill Mitchell, our vice president, wanted to get it out of the mainstream so that all the engineers and the cost guys wouldn't mess up the car. So that's also true. So it was protected in our studio. So we did fronts and rears on the '66 Toronado. Yeah, there's a rear sketch. And
We had.
did you?
Yeah.
'66 Toronado? Yeah. Yeah. Even before you knew Otto?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. His father-in-law was an Olds dealer down in Rushville, Indiana, and some other connections there too. Yeah. So real interesting counterpoint here is not only was I a junior designer in an advanced studio working on Toronados, my dad was a part of the engineering team to put this together. Dad was chief chassis engineer at the time, and he is like there's my dad, there's my Uncle Don, and they were both engineers at Oldsmobile in the day. They were there for all the great old NASCAR years, the J2 engines and all the things, but this was a crowning glory, believe me, for the Oldsmobile team. Car of the year in 1966.
And that was your design?
I'm sorry?
That was your design?
No, I just got a chance to do a proposal for a front end, but the front end design, they took on a little bit of that flavor, but they did a barbell design over and under slots, as you can see, surrounding the thin grille. But it was a treat to just get to work on the car, you know. And and I'm back up and say one other thing wisdom that my dad gave me. He wanted me to go to General Motors Institute. He says, he was an old Purdue engineer. Yep, right, Purdue engineer. And he said something to the effect is, before you go off and draw cars, you better get an engineering degree. So here I am finishing up my 5th year project to get my degree. And I designed an entire vehicle, which was a shopper car. GM had done one earlier for the World's Fair, but it was kind of pie in the sky design. They wanted to have more research and they wanted to make it more real, possibly go into production. So this is what I was looking at. This is my final show to get my degree. And okay, then I thought I'll get into the different studios here, but to understand a little bit about what a design studio was like in the day and still is. There were basically 3 types of personnel in any given design studio. creative designers like myself. We were the artists. We had the ideas. We would draw them. We would work with the engineers who were called technical stylists to make them real in terms of getting people in them, packaging a power plant, ramp angles, luggage, all the requirements that you need to make the windows go down and the hoods raise up and all that. And then we would translate the idea that's qualified with some engineering to the clay sculptor, and we would all work together. The synergy was all, for one, to do a clay model and typically start out with a scale to prove it out before you spend the time and money to a full-size car. But if you were lucky, your design, your scale model got chosen to go forward into a full-size clay. That was the day. This is a typical studio back in the day, and this is, as you can see, the mid-50s. And Claire McKeegan in the suit there is the chief designer talking to his assistant chief designer. And you can see the designers off on the left with their sketches. This would be an exterior studio. The interior studios were separate in those days. But if you look off in the far right-hand distance, you can see the full-size clay of a future, I think it's a 57 Chevy coming along. Is that a 7?
7.
Yeah. And then over on the upper left, you can see the engineer at the full-size board drawing. He's got a sweep. So, the car has to be drawn full-size as well, kind of before you model it full-size. And back in those days, before we had digital surface recording, we used plywood templates, even for production full-size car. And you would go to the board with the engineer and you'd draw a line, he'd make a drawing, he'd send it to the wood shop. Wood shop would bring back a wood template, hand it to the sculptor, and they'd work it into clay. And if you got one side of the car like you wanted it, then they'd have to make templates off the clay to flip it over to do the whole car. It was crude, but we made it work, and we were putting out in those days almost one new body style almost every year or every 2 years. We were cracking. That's why.
It's the 57, and that's clay, right? That 57 Chevy is a clay model.
Yeah.
So the 56 to the right, is that also clay?
Is it what?
Is that 56 blue Chevy also clay?
Oh, that's a good question. No, that would most likely be a fiberglass car.
Color.
Yeah, yep. I'll kind of get into that process because you'd go from clay to fiberglass model to get the corporate approval. And here's just some more. You can see an airbrush rendering up in the corner there behind the 55 Chevy. Yeah. So after I completed my 5th year project and got my degree, the question came up, well, okay, do you need to go out to Art Center in California for another 3 years and beaucoup thousands of dollars, or CCS in Detroit, which was arts and crafts at the time? And Chuck said, no, he's ready to go. Put him on the firing line in Cadillac Studio. So I started in Cadillac Studio, and this was what would be mid-60, 67, 68, 69 era of Cadillacs. And these are all proposals. Now, your proposal might not get on the road, but there might be a seat of it, might be a fender end or a boot area that they really liked, that they take off your sketch and they might take a grill off another designer's. So rarely is it one individual that does the whole car. Sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes you can draw it on a napkin and it goes to production, but not always.
John, who are the they?
They?
Yeah, who are the they that are overseeing all of this?
Good question. Multiple layers. So there'd be, if you were a designer like myself, there'd be an assistant chief, then a chief designer, and then the director of design, and then the vice president, all in the design family. But no, they're not your only clients. Oldsmobile is paying for Oldsmobile, or in this case, Cadillac's paying the bill. So Cadillac general manager comes in with his chief engineer and his cost guy and all that. But wait a minute, once they all agree, you haven't sold it to the corporation yet. So GM Corporation, I can't even remember all the names back then. They'd have to come in and have the final stamp of approval. And if they didn't, you're back. You got to scramble to do a new front end. I mean, that's how the game was played. Yes, sir.
You start to think about styles. Were your kind of renderings guided by consumer insights?
Yeah.
Like, you fed research that would share, like, kind of guide your ideation.
Was it guided by consumer? Yes, it was kind of a gut feeling type of thing, but in the day, it wasn't nearly as much as when I retired. We knew when a customer sneezed. I mean, we had so much data and so many clinics, and so we just pounded things into the earth sometimes, maybe didn't always get the right answer either. But yes, we had a pulse on it. We thought we were enough in the game and in the business that we could kind of know what's right, but we did have a lot of sales and marketing input. Yeah. This is another Canson rendering. This is a Bellum rendering. So, to start out with, you designed the whole car, and you usually start with a side view, of course, to get the car, and then try to put the right front end on it and put the right rear end on it, do the right grille details, come up with the right tail lights. Oh, somebody's got to design the wheels and the wheel covers. I mean, every detail, right down to the door handle and the pinstripes on a car, we did. And we did it for every car in our lineup. So we kept busy. This was, I think that one's here. This is the original right here. Yeah. And no exaggeration there. We tried not to cheat these. Now, we had to get the attention of the bosses, right? So if you did just a photographic, sketch, it was boring. So you had to take artist liberties, right? Put a little stretch to it. Most of that was done with pencil and chalk and some dry marker, of course. Yeah. And I think that front end is over here. The original is here too. Yeah. And this is an exercise in perspective. You probably spend a whole day getting the perspective right, and then the next day you render it. Yeah, something like this would take, it would basically take a day to render. But kind of a cute story. I had done a rendering of a gold Cadillac convertible, top down, a driver leaning with sunglasses, the tires turned, and Chuck Jordan came in and saw it and loved it. And after lunch, I got called into my boss's office, and I was the punk designer in Cadillac. And he said, "Come with me, kid." I thought, oh boy, where am I going? He takes me down to Pontiac Studio, and it's like I was reborn. I got to work now on Pontiacs and Bonnevilles and GTOs and Firebirds and all of those cool cars after about 4.5 years in Cadillac. So
was that a promotion?
That was not a promotion. Not a promotion. That was a side lateral move. Yeah. I just came in. This car was all done, but Jack Humbert, my boss, wanted a illustration in the entranceway of our studio, and he picked me to do a GTO rendering. So that set in our entranceway in Pontiac exterior studio. It was just recently down at the DIA in Detroit, part of the automotive exhibit that they had done in '68. Then this is that original over there. Pardon?
Was the Pontiac Studio in Dearborn as well, or where was the Pontiac?
And that's another good question about where the studios were. All the studios were within the design staff building, just right down the road. Cadillac, Buick, Oldsmobile, Pontiac, and Chevrolet, right in a row with a north view of the lake. but we were all under one roof. Yeah. And you could get moved from studio to studio. You might think, well, can't this guy hold a job, right? Our boss was smart, Bill Mitchell. He knew that designers, yeah, they could get stale. So he rotated us and moved us around. And he said, if you're a good designer, you can design a parking meter or you can design a Cadillac DeVille. You should be able to design, anything. So what was another one? Worked, pushed hard to get a body color resilient rear end on the GTO. The GTO for 68 had that, like the red sketch, that wonderful Enduro front end that, they hit it with a sledgehammer and you couldn't hurt it, and it was body color and it could be right out into the crush zone. And we wanted to make the rear end match in terms of the looks and the technology. And we tried and tried and tried to get a body color rear. This has a little bit of chrome on it. And this is a Le Mans Tempest front end there. Had a lot of fun with that one. Most of that's a dry mark and chalk. All starts with a white piece of vellum. Can't believe it, all that chalk. Yeah. Oh, there's the other one, body color rear end on a GTO proposal, but we never could get the money to do it. At least, but that led the way for what you see on all your vehicles nowadays, to have resilient body color, crash proof materials out into the impact zone. And that's something we could never do back in the day. It's just, and then when the major car programs were done, we had a little time to play. So we could just do some future cars like that and say, okay, maybe that's your next GTO. And then I was off to Chevrolet Studio, the Chevelle Studio. And again, that's the original down there. So Chevy, us designers in Chevrolet at the time felt that the SS, which had the chrome bumper and a hard front end panel, just wasn't up to the same level of the Pontiac GTO with a resilient front end. So this is one of our proposals to put a body color resilient front end on the SS Chevelle right here. Another dry marker sketch on vellum. And I forgot if this was what year this would have been. Proposal for a new Caprice coupe. From where I stand, it looks like it's all front end proportion here. And again, you had to design every view, every part of the car, front ends, rear ends, sides.
So John, was there any difference between designing for Cadillac versus Chevrolet versus, cost-wise, resource-wise?
Well, very much so, yeah. Cadillac seemed to be almost an unlimited budget. Corporate wise, Chevy had a much tighter budget, even though they had the volume. It was down to tool, cost of tooling, and the piece price cost. It had to average that all out and make sure that they were going to make money. Yeah. Okay. This is significant because this isn't just a sketch like this. This was a front end airbrush, full size airbrush rendering that I did. And it was done again on a 80-inch wide sheet of white vellum. It was drawn and then taped with black tape. We kind of drew with black tape. That was like the Bible. So it was all drawn. It was masked and sprayed with an airbrush in different layers to get all the different colors. And it probably took 3 or 4 days to do one like this. But this was the pretty close to the final design of what would have been the 72 Caprice Impala front end. I don't think we got the round driving lights.
So
But,
John, this is 68, what the drawing is?
yeah, 68.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, did you guys design that far ahead of production?
Yeah, 3 or 4
3
years.
or 4 years?
Yeah, yeah, 3 or 4 years. And it varied too with, well, I'm trying to think of what would have driven it to be different. In some cases, there was it was a shorter timetable. They wanted something immediately. They felt the market was saying, we got to get cranked up for it. And a little bit more playtime between major programs. That was a lot of fun. And then I was off to Buick Studio. By the time I was assistant chief engineer in the Chevelle studio, I went into Buick as their assistant chief. And this is kind of back to just a hand-drawn sketch here. There's some body side themes there. Great story in my days in the Buick studio. There was a corporate review of all the general managers came in Buick studio, and along with the vice president and the CEO of General Motors, all the heavy hitters. And in that group was John Belts, who was the general manager of Oldsmobile. I don't know if any of you might know that name from way back, but John Belts knew me from my young days at Oldsmobile because I would draw things for him. And he broke away from this group of all the brass. He came right over to me and he said, "What are you doing in Buick studio? You were raised on Oldsmobile milk." It was and it just touched me. Well, it wasn't long before I was in Oldsmobile studio.
Oh,
Yeah, I spent most of my career in the Oldsmobile studio. I ran the Cutlass Supreme studio for many, many years, the G bodies. But I thought I'd share a little bit of the design process with you. And it's pretty much the same as today, from the ideation sketches that us designers would do. You had to translate that into a line drawing or a tape drawing. And from that, it would lead to a scale model working with the sculptors. And if that got the nod of approval, you could continue as a full-size tape drawing or a full-size airbrush rendering, which would then lead to a full-size clay model. And after we had the clay model, we would run a parallel program with a scale model and a full-size aero model to verify the aerodynamic qualities of the vehicle. And then that would lead to a fiberglass model for corporate approval. And once it bridged that hurdle, then you could we would go into pre-production, die tryout, then the final product in the plants. That's kind of simplified version, but you can see. So we're a part of everything right down to the last two. You know, we do the fiberglass models. I'll get more into that here, but this is an example with a team of maybe 5 designers in a studio, all in friendly competition with each other. We could fill a 20-foot board with little roughy sketches like this in one afternoon. And then the bosses had to pick, which designer we're going forward with. These were just some things for a possible E-body Toronado. Yeah, right. So here is an example of working on a scale model. You can see some of the sketches that fed the idea into the scale model. And here's finished scale model. We did many of these. You might have 5 or 6 of these in a given program. Because again, no matter how great a sketch looks, there's some liberties taken with a sketch, and they come out when you have to put it into shape, when it goes from 2D to 3D.
Is this proposed for Pontiac?
Pardon?
Is that a Pontiac proposal?
No, that was a Cutlass Supreme. Cutlass Supreme.
Split grill, which is sort of Pontiac.
Well, that became Oldsmobile's, yeah, strong point, yeah. But yeah, and Pontiac in a different manner, yeah. So this is a full-size tape drawing. It's all done with black tape of 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch or whatever. Black Krylon of a future Cutlass Supreme proposal, and airbrush rendering. One, and you can see there's all around the studio, there's just examples of ideas. And this is one I added because this was, imagine this, it was a 20-foot long piece of vellum and I rendered, this is back in my days in Chevy Studio, a Chevelle being passed by a Chevelle SS. This was all the airbrush rendering. And I know I couldn't do that again. Yeah. So what happens is you stay late at night, you're the only one in the studio. You have an overhead projector, you've got a little, you drew it on a little flimsy, put it on your overhead projector, turn off the studio lights, project it and draw on. And then the next day you come in and tape it, and then you start rendering it. And you have to render it in layers, you know, if you're familiar with Frisket paper, you have to just start with the darkest first and go to the lightest and lightest and lightest. And then here's an example of a young man doing a tape drawing. You can kind of see what the tape is all about there. He's doing a tape rendering. That happens to be our son.
Oh,
And when he was at CCS, and yes, he followed in my footsteps. He's still there. I'll give you a little bit more on that. But here is Jeff doing a car for his junior year at Center for Creative Studies. Wilder than I ever did. Okay, getting back to reality here. There's a full-size clay model, and you wonder, what is that light-colored stuff on the side of the car? It's what we call Dynoc. It's a giant decal-like product. It's you soak it in hot water, you pull the backing off of it, and you apply it to the clay model, and it's stretchy and ductile, and it'll conform to the clay, just unbelievable. And here is the guys in action. So once we got a finished clay model, we want to show it to management. Well, they can't understand the brown clay model. You got to make it look like a real car. And not only do we have Dynoc on it, or any color you want. We use chrome foil like you use in the kitchen for the bumpers and the wheels and all that stuff. So they look pretty real, but one thing that's really different, they don't have windows in them. You can't see through them. So we put a kind of a shiny charcoal Dynoc on the windows to simulate the glass area. Yeah. And these suckers are heavy. Clay is so heavy that if it was a solid clay model, it would fall through the floor. So the armatures are aluminum, and then on top of aluminum is foam, and the foam is rough cut to the general shape of the car by the wood shop, and you leave yourself 2 or 3 or 4 inches of space, and then they put hot, and it comes out, and you slap it on the clay model and you work it down. But once it cools, it shaves like a fine wood, and it doesn't stick to the tools. It was an amazing, it took some years to develop to get it right through Chavant Clay Company. But it's just a wonderful medium to use. And that's what it could look like outside on the patio. That's just an example of a finished clay model. That's all clay. For future, you can tell what that car is. And
Including the wheels?
No, these wheels, well, those are real wheels, but sometimes we use photographs. And nowadays, I was just at the design staff a couple of weeks ago. Nowadays, they use 3D printing. The wheels are like, oh my God, with all the little veins and everything else. Yeah. Lifted out. It's a non-roller. The wheels are just propped up there. The car is on power jacks. Yeah. And then you have to take 2, what would you call them, movers at both ends of the car, take it out of the studio, drag it down the hallway, take it out on the patio, put it on the turntable, bring it all back in. And then yeah, no. And then at the same time, to get a good evaluation of the aerodynamic characteristics of the car, we did a scale model. And we would take that, well, in the old days, we used to take it down to Lockheed Tunnel in Marietta, Georgia, but then we built our own tunnel. There goes all those trips. But anyway, yeah. And then also to a full-size aero model. And you get back just tons of data.
Inside the tunnel.
Yeah.
That's what
So,
agreed to.
and we take clay models into the tunnels because we take our sculptors with us between the runs, and we would add or subtract clay to get the optimum, laminar flow, connected flow. We would add wings, and sometimes you test the mirrors and the door handles and everything like that, every part of the car. And you can get a reading. It's very definitive, what you should do. And from all of that, we build a fiberglass model. This is our Cutlass Supreme fiberglass car. Beautifully, all built in our shops. Brass headlamp bezels, triple chrome plated, bumpers chrome plated, rocker moldings chrome plated. Everything was, it was cast from the clay. I guess I should back up a little bit, with giant plaster molds. The plaster molds were then flipped over and laid up with fiberglass to get the fiberglass shell. And those fiberglass panels were attached to a substructure, because this is not a real car. Now, this is a roller. This one rolls, thank goodness. And I noticed afterwards, I put this picture in the show, it's also power elevated. We're up a little higher. This is the off-road Cutlass Supreme. Notice that? Yeah. They'd sell a ton of them nowadays, wouldn't they? But you have to be all covered with mud, Yeah. So that was our Cutlass Supreme. Okay, then I was off to Oldsmobile Studio, where I mentioned I spent the majority of my 40 years career there. We had just done, the new Colonnade coupes came out. So this was just a early sketch for Cutlass, but I thought it'd be interesting to give you a little bit more insight into a real program. And some people always ask, well, why do all cars look the same? They don't, but they do. But there were always some reasons that drove cars to be similar in certain areas. So a typical program like this is a 76 Cutlass. The windshield, roof panel, front side glass, and in some cases backlight, the blue areas were corporate, and that was done by let's say the lead studio. And then you would have to, your clay model would have to represent the blue areas, but also be driven by tooling costs would be a shared door. Doors are expensive because they have inners and outers, and they have power windows, and they go up and down, and they have locks and things. And so the doors are always a high rent district. So starting with that, the Oldsmobile parts are in the red. And then here's the final car.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so you can kind of see what we're given and what we come up with. Now we're in competition with Buick, so we're going to make, we think, the best damn looking front end and rear end that we can, on that. This is what we call the NASCAR front end for the 76 Cutlasses and Cutlass S. This is very similar to a sketch I did. Oldsmobile loved that we got the new rectangular headlights that year. Oldsmobile loved that sketch. And so we modeled it, and that became the Cutlass S. And what was neat, this is a full-size clay of it, but Oldsmobile was pretty darn smart. Back in those days, to keep the tooling costs and the piece costs down, Oldsmobile built their own front end panels in-house. And they were done out of SMC, sheet molded compound. And that's the area shown in red here. And because they did it in-house, they're able to do multiple designs. So Oldsmobile we all felt that the Cutlass Supreme notchback roofline didn't look so good with a sloped front end. It looked too sporty. Well, we got a whole new opportunity for you with this front end panel, and we can do a Cutlass Supreme. Now, this is an early 76 Cutlass Supreme front end. Interestingly, we were looking at putting the parking lights above the headlights back in that stage right there. That didn't fly because we could save some money by commonizing them with the S, but so that's the front end right there. So to get to this car right here, we had the slope back front end, and Oldsmobile was about to come down to review the design for the Cutlass Supreme. So I took cardboard and I just, instead of sloping it, I just raise the cardboard like this, vertical, and let the grills wrap way over the top. And they loved it. That became the Olds Cutlass Supreme. Yeah. And this, as you can see, that's what it looked like there. And there. And then every, as I mentioned, every part and every detail on every car, somebody had to design it. Those taillights, that rear bumper. Oh, okay, I'll get into that. Forgot what I was gonna say back there. Well, anyway, just, okay, jumping forward to the next wave. As you all remember, probably the oil embargo, the OPEC 1973 constraints that caused the whole industry to downsize their vehicles to much lighter, smaller vehicles. Here's an example from the Ward's cover that showed that our new white Cutlass Supreme was 15 inches shorter, 700 and so pounds lighter and narrower than the old car. So it was an all new major program. And we were really hustling to get this one done. And again, there was constraints. The corporate roof area, and I use red in this case, plus the Buick door in yellow. And we went from there with a theme drawing. Should have kind of had that first. That's a beautiful airbrush rendering Tom Semple did. And to the final car. And oh, let me back up a little bit here too. Our previous Cutlass Supreme that I showed you won a great honor. We sold more Cutlass Supremes than we did, than the corporation did of the Chevrolet Caprices and Impalas. First time that Cutlass Supreme nameplate had ever beat out the Chevy. And with 550,000, okay, I've got a skedaddle here. 550,000 units that year, $1.some million Oldsmobiles.
Wow.
And this scaled down version, we still sold 400,000 of those. And you can see some of the sketches for the front end theme, the wrap over grille. Those are just quickie prism colors. Rear. And this is the final fiberglass car of this era. And we did a two-tone paint scheme that led to the first Olds, because we had this paint masking in the plant and they couldn't say no. Yeah. And there's the fiberglass model, some guy standing there. And the next thing was, I had done a little roughy sketch. I said, well, we've been doing this wrap over grille for a number of years. How about if we just wrap it out? And this is when we were getting more sophisticated with our bumpers and our urethane material, flexible. And so that led to this car here and this car here. And we sold a ton of these. These cars look good in tennis shoes, or they look good at the prom, you know. This is my favorite commercial. How did Cutlass become America's most popular? By design. We bribed the ad agency on that one. And also we did a Hurst Olds on that car. I'm going to scoot here because this is a good story. Next came along the Oldsmobile Toronado. And it started out as a sketch like this, but it quickly became the Aurora. And I'm really going to paraphrase the scale model here. It started out as a two-door Toronado replacement, but there it is right there, the early Tornadoes. There I am waving my arm. And I even get into the action there. See, I know how to tape lines on a clay model. But there it was. That was the early Toronado with what we call a Coke bottle shape, like this. Very narrow cross section with, and then it swelled out over the wheels. So you didn't have to have wheel lips, and very aircrafty in that sense. But Oldsmobile was working with our sister Advanced Studio, thinking there would be more wisdom in doing a four-door sports car rather than a two-door, because the two-door market was kind of drying up per se. So they let Buick have the Riviera and we did the Aurora. And here's the Aurora now taking shape. And we brought the interior guys in our studio, so there was a great synergy between the outside, the exterior and the interior of the car. And here it is taking shape as the early Aurora. Getting down to the final car. That was billed, we saw it in print many times, the most beautiful car that General Motors ever did. And I don't know if you believe that or not, but that car really got a lot of accolades. It didn't break any great sales records at that time. And then quick section here. People ask, well, you still draw cars? Yeah, I do. So I'm going to go through, after I retired, a league of retired designers get together. These are my buddies from Ford and Chrysler and GM. We get together every year and we pick, in this case, we picked Ferrari to do a car. There's a Studebaker, a modern day Studebaker. There's a modern day Kaiser Darren with a sliding door. There's a modern day Lincoln Continental. And this is my favorite, my Duesenberg. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and modern day Packard. And a modern day Tucker. So yes, I still keep my hand in it.
Doodle on that.
I'm sorry.
You doodle on your napkin in the restaurant.
Yeah. Once you're a designer, you can't
You
stop.
can't stop.
You can't stop. And this is a person. And that's Bearcat with a monocle windshield. And yes, my son is still at General Motors, he's 35 years. He's a design manager on the Equinoxes and has been working on Silverado. So he's got quite a bit of experience there. And oh, you don't want to see that. Anyway, that's kind of my story. I'm sticking to it. And I'd be happy to answer questions if they're design related. I don't know all the compression ratios and the shock valves and all that stuff because I'm the artist, remember? And I don't know. Well, give me a shot.
John, what did you think when GM decided to collapse Oldsmobile and
Olds and Pontiac. It was just terrible. I still hurt from that today. You know, I just couldn't see it. Just Olds and Pontiac just out the window. There was a lot of corporate politics that led to that, but I could see it coming because Buick, for instance, would get money for all new front end. We'd get money for a grill, and we couldn't get money for a taillight. I could just see the writing on the wall. Too bad, yeah. Any other questions? I know you want to know why all cars look alike. I've been there before. Yes, sir.
Pertaining to the clay that you were using, was that a natural clay or was it a synthetic clay?
Well, I don't really know the answer to it, but I'm going to guess it was synthetic. It was, I believe it was man-made. I think it was formulated to do exactly what it did, because it didn't just happen overnight. There was a lot of feedback until we got it just right. Yeah, and Harley Earl started the whole he started the whole thing of car design back in 1927 when he started the General Motors Art and Color section. And one of his mainstays was the use of clay to do the early bodies. And people couldn't believe that at the time. It's like, this is kids play, right? You know, but it proved out. And there's, to paraphrase, and I've been back to the new GM Design Center in Warren, Michigan, and got a complete walkthrough there. And we're still using clay for scale models. We're still using clay for full-size models. Yep, same basic clay. But now we have such sophisticated milling machines that we can capture the surface of a scale model and then express it in a full size, like overnight. And some programs are so good that the designers, they don't do chalk or pencil or ink or anything anymore. It's all computer drawings. Just amazing. It's photographic realism, you know. And it does take some of the individual spirit out of it, but they all look about the same. You can't tell whose work it is because they're all so good. But Yes,
You know, spirit. When you were doing your, kind of ink drawings, you ever hide little pictures? Little design elements, maybe a drawing of a girlfriend's face into a headlight.
okay, I'm not quite sure I understand what you're saying.
Just was curious when you were doing your design elements on the early stages when they were pen and ink. Do you ever hide things into the shadows, like in a headlight design with shadow? An image, you know, like.
Hide an image?
Fine, like you see something found it, like fine.
Well, not exactly, but a lot of times our artwork went out for magazine publications and all that. And you weren't supposed to put your name on it, of course. We always hit our little, always hit a little JP in there. You bet. Yeah, always. And then another counterpart to all this is, you probably wonder how did I make off with all of these renderings? I've got like 350 at home that I made out with over my career. You weren't supposed to do that. But I taught a car design class on Saturday mornings, and I would always take a box full of supplies for the kids. Well, guess what was in the bottom of that box? Every time. So then GM wanted them all back, and they said, you can still own them, but we want them back to digitize them. So now they have a complete library of my works. And then they had included those in a retrospective they did back in 2015 for my, but yeah, it was, oh, you had to be clever about getting the works out. But, you know, once they're obsolete and the car was in the junkyard, who cares, right? Hey, honey, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I have to second that. My kid, our kids were little, that's when you had the most overtime.
I know. Yeah, when she was changing diapers and stuff like that, I would have to work till 9 o'clock every night, Saturday, sometimes Sundays. We could, if we worked Sunday, we could get the next 2 days off, though. It was pretty nice. Yeah. Yes, sir.
This may not even have a yes or no or right answer, but why did in the 60s, all the car designs get bigger and bigger and bigger, when in Europe they were getting smaller and smaller?
I know.
And we used to refer to it as Das Boot.
Das Boot. Yeah, right. Das Boot. Yeah. Yeah. Excuse me. I didn't plan on that. Yeah. Yeah. Has something to do with what we call the ugly American. No, I don't know. But yeah, it was part of longer, lower, wider. It was thought to be the way to go. And boy, the public was eating them up, you know. But we didn't know, of course. A lot of people knew that appreciated the MGs and the 120 Jags and all the cars that were that size. But yeah, you're right. We just kept getting bigger and bigger. But that came to a, as you know, quite a turnaround there. Yeah.
Do you miss not being on the EV revolution taking place? It seems we were just in Washington State and it looked like a quarter of the cars were EVs and they were sensational.
Yeah. Besides
the Tesla, which is a boring design. But the other cars, is that something that you're like, oh, I missed it, or you're glad you're not part of it?
Well, that's a good question, because when I walked through the new GM Design Center, they had all the future cars out for us retirees, so we could see what the EVs down the road are. Oh my God, I wanted to buy every one of them.
Really?
They are that exciting. Yeah, they're a new architecture, of course. One of the things I'm so glad that they're doing in the future, and that is, if it's an electric car, you don't just take today's typical car and remove the grille and leave nothing there. I just can't understand that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But these are all new from the ground up, and I would love to still be a part of that. Yeah.
Do you
Yes.
think there's a place for the hybrid?
Oh, yeah.
I just wonder, like, if you look back over your entire career, what was the one moment that you're most proud of?
Well, probably the Oldsmobile Aurora. And some of our other cars got design awards also. But to me, that car was, it was such a challenge to do. What I really didn't say is the Aurora was a repackaged Olds 98 Buick Electra.
Hmm.
Can you believe that?
Hmm.
We moved the cowl down, we moved the battery back, we tipped the windshield, we lowered the roof, you know, and we widened the track to make that car all happen. So to me, what we had to do to get there and where we started and how it came out, I'm super proud of that one. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well,
Oh, I just wonder, with your tour of the design center and all the EVs, is there any future coming in GM for a hybrid? They
Oh.
used to have one, I own one, Saturn,
Hmm.
but it seems like they've disappeared, and the only ones you can find now are the Asian-made cars, and I would love to have hybrid.
Yeah.
I won't buy Asian.
You didn't hear this, you didn't hear this from me, but the answer is yes.
I-
Yeah. Yeah. Phil?
Oh, that's fine.
Oh.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I feel so blessed to have a career where I followed my dream
Wow.
and get paid money for drawing cars. Yeah. Thank you
Thanks,
for making
Tom.
this happen.